In a small, quaint, leafy town in England, there lives a woman named Grace. She has spent 20 years building a life with her husband, Mark, a life rooted in routine, faith, and patience. Each evening, she prepares his favorite meal, sets the table just so, and fills their home with an unwavering sense of calm, stability, and devotion. We find Grace in her kitchen. She wipes her hands on a soft kitchen towel and glances towards the door with a calm, almost expectant smile. To Grace, rituals are sacred. She believes that Mark's guidance, his protective nature, and his steady hand create a foundation for their love. She's convinced herself that her marriage is what love looks like, a quiet life filled with small gestures, with loyalty and faithfulness. She flicks on the kitchen lights, her figure now bathed as the steady glow spreads across the countertops, illuminating her hands as they move through the motions of chopping and slicing. Her expression is serene, focused. Each slice is precise, each movement slow and deliberate, as though she's performing an ancient ritual passed down through generations. The soft thunk-thunk of the knife hitting the chopping board is the only sound in the room, rhythmic and soothing. She slides the chopped vegetables into a pot on the stove, where they join the fragrant broth. A hint of rosemary drifts through the air, mingling with the subtle, earthy smell of the vegetables, creating an aroma that fills the room, warm and comforting. Grace leans in, closing her eyes for a moment as she breathes in the scent, allowing it to calm her mind. She moves to the tea kettle, reaching for her favorite delicate ceramic teapot, soft ivory in color with a single pale blue flower painted on its side. Her fingers wrap around it with care, as though it's a precious relic. She places a handful of loose chamomile and mint leaves into the pot, watching as the hot water slowly steeps the herbs, releasing soft tendrils of steam that curl and twist into the air. Grace tells herself that this ritual, this quiet, careful preparation, is a testament to her love. In every slice, every stir, she pours her devotion, convinced that these small acts are what hold their life together. Grace takes a single cream-colored candle from a drawer and sets it in the center of the table. She lights it with a match, and for a moment, her face glows in the flickering light. She adjusts the candle just so, ensuring that its light casts a soft, welcoming glow over the table. Shadows dance gently on the walls, adding a sense of intimacy, as if this space is a sacred haven. She takes a step back, looking at the table she's set, a simple, neatly arranged place for two. She adjusts the napkins, straightens the silverware, and then nods to herself, satisfied. Her eyes linger on the empty chair across from hers, her lips curving into a soft smile, her expression one of quiet fulfillment. To Grace, this is what love looks like. The rituals, the quiet acts of care, the warmth she brings to their home. She believes that each careful gesture, each small sacrifice, is a sign of devotion. This isn't just a routine to her, it's a sacred ceremony, one that she believes holds her life, her marriage, in perfect balance. She pours herself a cup of tea, the steam rising gently, swirling in the candlelight as she takes a seat at the table. She wraps her hands around the warm ceramic, closing her eyes for a moment, as if grounding herself in the comfort of the ritual she has perfected over the years. Grace sitting alone at the table, bathed in the soft glow of the candle. Outside, the night is quiet, the darkness pressing gently against the windows. The world beyond feels distant, separate from this warm, contained space that Grace has created. Grace has spent years perfecting this routine, convinced that her careful attention to detail, her steady hands, and her endless patience are the truest signs of her love. She believes that by keeping this ritual alive, she keeps her love alive too. In her eyes, this ritual of care is as essential as breath itself. Grace glances again at the empty chair across from her, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her teacup. Her gaze softens, and she lets out a small, contented sigh, whispering to herself as if she's reassuring her own heart. He'll be home soon. He loves it when everything's ready for him, says Grace, the candlelight casting gentle shadows that accentuate the softness in her expression, a mix of hope and quiet conviction as she waits for Mark to come home. Grace glances up at the kitchen clock. It's 9 o'clock, and Mark has not arrived home. She checks her phone again for the 20th time, scrolling through old messages from Mark. Double-checking she hadn't missed any text messages while she was preparing dinner. Mark hates it when she doesn't respond to his calls or messages immediately. These days, he's been really busy, Grace reassures herself. Work has him running on empty, I know that. He told me that. I shouldn't take it personally, Grace muses. He just needs time to breathe, that's all. We'll have our time together soon. Suddenly, Grace receives a text from Mark that's short and dismissive. Can't talk now. Busy. Feeling anxious and uneasy, she stares at her phone, rereading his brief message, searching for any hint of warmth or concern. Her heart sinks. Maybe I did something to upset him again. He sounded so cold. But what did I do? I tried to make sure everything was right today. Maybe he's just tired. Maybe it's better if I don't push him. I don't want him to be angry with me again. Grace sighs and types a few texts but deletes them each time, worried they might come off as nagging. Finally, she settles on a short, neutral response that won't make him angry, yet still shows concern. Grace's face falls slightly, but then she pulls herself together, smiling as if to convince herself that all is well, and that Mark will explain his not letting her know in advance why he would be late home from work, or even if he would be home at all. Sometimes he doesn't even bother to text her, but that's just how he is. He's got so much on his mind. I shouldn't expect his attention all the time. It wouldn't be fair, reflects Grace. Her phone remains silent for the rest of the evening. She looks over at the pot on the stove. Her smile fades briefly, but then brightens up slightly as she moves over to the stove and prepares to pack up the food for the 100th time. As she prepares to put the food away, Grace reminisces, vividly recalling the golden days when Mark would surprise her with flowers, called her his world, and made her feel she was the only woman in the world for him. She recalls a time when she and Mark were at a small cafe close to their church. They'd known each other for a while through the congregation, when Mark, out of the blue, started paying attention to her. Grace was flattered, but also surprised by his sudden interest. They sat close, a Bible and notebook between them on the table, their conversation warm and familiar, Mark smiling warmly. I can't believe we've been going to the same church for so long, and I never noticed how incredible you are, Grace. You just have this light about you. Grace, blushing. Well, I mean, we see each other every Sunday. I guess I'm used to blending in. Mark, shaking his head, leaning closer. Not to me, not anymore. It's like one day, God just opened my eyes and I saw you for who you really are. I mean it, Grace. You're different. Grace, laughing shyly. I think you're giving me too much credit. I'm just trying to live the way we're called to. Mark, grinning and nodding. Exactly. It's your faith, your kindness. You have such a quiet strength, and it's honestly rare. People are always talking, but you live what you believe. I admire that more than I can say. Grace, smiling, yet feeling a bit overwhelmed. That's really kind of you to say, Mark. I had no idea you even noticed me. Mark, reaching out to take her hand, looking serious now. Notice you? Grace, you're all I've been able to think about lately. I think God brought you into my life for a reason. I feel this is something special, something real. Grace, surprised, glancing down to avoid his intense gaze. That's a big thing to say. I don't even know what to think. Mark, squeezing her hand. You don't have to think, Grace. Let me take the lead. I'll show you that this is real, that I'm here for the long haul. I want to be the kind of man who supports you, prays with you, who's always by your side. Grace, smiling, charmed yet cautious. I'm not used to this, Mark. This sudden interest, honestly, it's a little overwhelming. Mark lets out a soft chuckle. I get that. But when you know, right? Sometimes God's timing isn't what we expect. Leans in closer. Grace, let me be that person for you. I don't want to spend another day without you in my life. You're perfect for me. Grace bites her lip while feeling herself getting drawn in. I don't know what to say. It's all happening so fast. Mark, smiling warmly. Then don't say anything. Just trust me. Let me love you the way you deserve, Grace. I'll be by your side no matter what. Over the following 6 months, Grace was both hopeful yet slightly overwhelmed by Mark's growing intensity for her attention. His words grew ever more fervent, promising a future full of support, faith, and love, expressing intense words she found impossible to resist. He'd say things like, "I've never felt this way about anyone before, and you're perfect. I can't believe I finally found you. And people say I'm intense, but I just love deeply." His words drew her in, and there was no way to escape. The room is now dim, lit only by the warm, gentle glow of a single candle that has burned down almost to its end. Grace sits at the same table, her fingers wrapped around her fifth cup of tea, but tonight her expression is different. There's a heaviness in her gaze, an unspoken question in her eyes. The familiar hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock seem louder, pressing into the quiet of the room. Tonight, something feels different. For 20 years, Grace has kept this ritual, her heart convinced that each night spent waiting was an act of love. But tonight, there's a pause, the tiniest of shifts, as if the silence is speaking to her, asking her to look closer. She glances again at the empty chair across from her, the candlelight flickering on her face. Her fingers trace the rim of her teacup absently as she stares into the distance, lost in thought. Her eyes look weary, her face softened by a sadness she has kept hidden for many years, a sadness that now feels undeniable. Grace has always told herself that love means patience, that devotion is shown in the waiting. But as she sits here, the quiet pressing in on her, a thought creeps in, a quiet voice, long buried, whispering a question she has never dared to ask. A subtle change in her expression as doubt begins to fill her eyes. Her fingers tremble slightly as she places her teacup down, her gaze shifting from the candle to the door and back to the clock. The minutes continue to pass, and with each tick, the weight of her years of waiting begins to settle around her like a heavy cloak. 20 years. 20 years of waiting, of hoping, of convincing myself that patience is love. But tonight, she finds herself wondering if all this waiting, all these quiet sacrifices, are truly what love is all about. Her hand moves to her chest, gently resting over her heart, as if trying to soothe the ache that has been building there for many years. The flicker of realization in her eyes, a slow dawning, as though a hidden truth has finally come into view. The candle's flame wavers, casting shadows on the walls as Grace stares at it, watching as it dances, almost as if it's struggling to hold on, just like her. Her voice is barely a whisper, but in the quiet room, it's as though she's finally hearing herself for the first time. Is this really love? And in an instant, for the 1,000th time, Grace dismisses her thoughts completely. Her life is good with Mark. She has nothing to complain about. Mark is a good husband. I'm being silly, emotional, irrational. I'm just tired, that's all. I always get emotional when I'm tired. Mark's always telling me I'm too emotional. This is one of those times she convinces herself. Grace's journey is one of patience, loyalty, and quiet resilience. But what happens when the weight of waiting becomes too heavy to bear? What will she choose when faced with the ultimate truth? Will Grace be able to cope with the reality of her situation, or will she choose to stay in delightful ignorance? In the next episode, we'll see more of Grace's life with Mark, the many moments she chooses not to see for what they truly are, and the tiny scraps of attention and token gestures she continues to believe is love. If you're captivated by Grace's journey, please join us as we pull back the layers of her story one by one. And also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time. And in the meantime, stay safe and well.